I'm so glad that I have my colleagues whom we had an understanding with to sort of make themselves available given the technicality and the importance of this topic. And I'm really grateful to them that they have taken out time to be here today. Of course, some of them are on the way, but just in the interest of not penalizing others who are on time, we just thought that we'll just kick off and others can, of course, join us. Now, as most of you around the table have a keen interest in the subject, and most who confirmed, of course, also have a background in what we are discussing today. And the idea is, of course, to not only expand the outreach, but also strengthen the policy engagement so that thinking as well as actions towards making our systems more open can be expedited. We do have examples from the region which we can learn from. We do see that the procurement reforms, budget spending information, information regarding making laws available to the public, company registers, land ownership information. These are all data sets which are now starting to emerge, given that we have access to better technologies, integrated technologies, and we certainly want to sort of discuss this, how we can take it further from our current level of knowledge and really dovetail them with the current systems in the government so that development effectiveness is there in letter and spirit. We also understand that the recent experience has shown that when you integrate these data sets and make them open, they not only help in public spending reform or procurement reform, they also help in supplementary reforms which are related to, let's say, helping or sort of fending against tax evasion and the overall agenda of tax reforms at the national as well as the subnational level. One of the interesting case studies that we often discuss in STPI is the Open Budget India project, for example, which is run by a think tank actually, which is not-for-profit think tank in India, and it opens up the center as well as state and sub-state level budgets for the public, and they have a very decent data visualization routine on their portal, which helps people to really see how much of the government penny is being spent and where. So it has over time become a tracking institution for the civil society. Two similar efforts, of course, in Pakistan. One was the Pakistan Data Portal, in which we tried to open up education sector budgets to start with. It is still a pilot, given that it only focuses on one sector, which is education. One would, of course, certainly like to expand. Some of you may recall that this was done by STPI in partnership with Alif Elan, which lasted until last year, of course. We're also encouraged to see that the manifesto of PTI also talks about improving efficiency and effectiveness of public spending. And I think Pakistan's development partners have also been suggesting public funds reforms and PFM reforms we do see in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Punjab and Sindh provinces, which have taken shape. In Balochistan as well, we now have it in place since last year, which is indeed very encouraging. So the way we had structured this, and the way we thought that we will sort of take forward this session was that we thought that to set the tone, we could have two presentations, and I'm so glad that my colleague Mr. Ahmed Qadir has joined us for the first presentation. He is Director General at the Competition Commission of Pakistan. He has, of course, also served in other organizations, including the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Population Fund, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, brings a lot of experience in strategic management processes in the public sector. And of course, his key responsibility at the Commission is the communication with his counterparts locally as well as abroad regarding Commission's priorities, as well as communicating competition law awareness in key stakeholders in government, private sector, and academia. So thank you, Ahmed Sah, for joining us. Our second presentation will be by Mr. Rehan Haider Saab. He's public procurement professional for more than 24 years now. He has worked with the State Bank of Pakistan, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Development Department, and he's currently serving as a senior procurement specialist at the World Bank Group in Pakistan and Afghanistan. This position, of course, involves both operational and strategic support to different sectors in procurement. He's providing technical support to national as well as subnational governments in realignment of procurement regulatory policies and procedures for development effectiveness in Pakistan. These two presentations would be followed by two discussants whom we have requested today. Our first discussant will be Mr. Asim Jalil Saab, who is Director Monitoring and Evaluation with Public Procurement Regulatory Authority, PEPRA, Pakistan. Is Asim Saab is here? Not yet. I think he'll be joining us. And the second discussant for today will be Mr. Asim Ghaffar Saab, who's the Vice President of R&D at LMKR, also takes care of the national incubation centers, which are really key initiatives of the government of Pakistan. He has championed the setting up of NICs at Peshawar and Karachi, and he's a big champion of civic innovation. He's also the president of Code for Pakistan, so somebody who has been working on the open data from the practitioners end. We would really like to hear from him his perspectives on this subject. And then, of course, the floor will be open. We are really grateful that we have representation from the Federal Board of Revenue. Mansoor Malik Saab is here. We have Nasser Saab from Asian Development Bank, and of course other colleagues who are with us today. So maybe Ahmed Saab, if I can request you to go first for the opening presentation, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and I want to thank everybody for giving us a moment of their time to talk about open data systems and how we can sort of integrate these with development effectiveness in Pakistan. At the outset, let me be clear, I'm going to be talking about the issue of public procurement in Pakistan and what is the quantum of procurement that's done by government agencies for the welfare of the citizens of Pakistan. And I think Mr. Rehan Haider from the World Bank will also be supporting some of my points with some of his experiences. So I think I'll just talk about the backwards part. If I can just use one of my favorite quotations, I'll just talk about the backwards part, and then I think in the discussion we'll try to see how we take this thing forward. Now, I'm sorry, all right. Just a little technical hitch. Now, when we talk about public procurement, I think one important thing when we link it to the work of my organization, the Competition Commission, it's very important that the government gets good value for all the procurement that it does. Now, 2 years ago, we heard stories, we read in the papers that the public sector development program had crossed 1 trillion rupees. So that's a huge quantum of procurement that was to be done by the government. It's been revised downwards over in this last year, but substantially government procures a lot of services that it provides to the citizens. Now, when we have a competitive procurement system, that helps minimize costs for both firms and government. The firms meaning the procurement agencies that actually procure goods and services. In addition to that, it helps drive innovation because new products, new technologies, etc., are then introduced into the system that buttresses economic growth. Now, when we have competitive public procurement systems, the benefits of that accrue to the whole economy because most of Pakistan's procurement is focused on infrastructure. So we're talking about highways, electricity, power generation, etc. And this is supporting infrastructure for laying the solid foundation for what drives economic growth. So it's very important to look at how we can sort of plug the leakages over here. Now, the best way to ensure good value is through rigorous competition. Now, it's not only in the financial interest of the government, but it's also what is a very key component of any procurement reforms that are being undertaken by agencies like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, etc. But competition does not necessarily happen automatically. So even, there's no guarantee that when there's a procurement taking place, competition will happen. And companies will try to prevent this competition, notably by engaging in bid rigging. So, and if you go back to 1776 and Adam Smith, I think back then when he talked about, people of the same trade getting together, and the conversation rarely ends without some conspiracy against the public. So I think we see evidence of that to date. Now, what are the two factors that allow bid rigging to happen? One is the firm's or company's own conduct. This generally happens in the form of some agreement between companies who should ostensibly be competing with each other, but they decide to agree on certain things. Now, what kind of agreements are these? Now, they could range from who will win the bid, what kind of prices will they set, and what kind of customers will they work on. So some people may work for certain government agencies, some people may work for certain geographic areas, some people may decide to rotate the bids, etc. So there's a very elaborate mechanism of how bids are rigged. On the other side, on the government side, there could be a certain regulatory framework which, when we talk about transparency is good, but in the case of public procurement, too much transparency can actually be a cartel facilitator, or a framework which limits international competition by putting in place stringent rules and regulations, or it may favor joint bidding or subcontracting where it's very difficult to gauge the value that you're acquiring from companies that you select for business. Now, common forms of bid rigging, this could be cover bidding. So one competitor agrees that a bid may contain certain technical terms or conditions that the buyer does not want, automatically disqualifying that bid. But because there's more than one or two bids received, it gives the appearance of genuine competition taking place. Bid suppression is when a company decides not to take part in a tender. Bid rotation, when companies decide who will be the winning company in a cycle of procurement activities. And market allocation is working with certain customers or working in certain geographic areas. Now, the World Bank says in their 2012 document called Why Reform Public Procurement, that it's one of the government functions that's most prone to corruption. And then Transparency International also says that up to a fifth of government contracts, the value of those can be lost to corruption. So these are staggering figures. Now, in Pakistan, our national anti-corruption strategy of 2002 also highlights this particular point, that large-scale corruption in government fund utilization has been during the procurement and contracting phase. And the worst offenders are those particularly in large infrastructure and public works and power utilities. Is it any surprise that we have a power crisis which does not seem to be solving itself despite the passage of so many years? So even Pakistan has taken a look at these things. If you look at the numbers, now South Asia has the highest share of public procurement in GDP. So in Pakistan, the figure is 19.8%. So this is a World Bank blog that I looked at, and this dates back to 2016. The figure may have come down slightly, but I'm pretty certain it's still above 15% of GDP. So if you look at today's figures, 35 trillion GDP, of which procurement is about 7 trillion, of which you lose around 1.4 trillion. So 1.4 trillion rupees lost annually to leakages in the public procurement process. And so this is not a small amount of money that we're talking about. Now, coming back to Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner in 2001, competition is the basis for a market economy, but firms try to restrict it because it's much easier to make monopoly profits or reduce competition for personal gain. Now, collusion in public procurement in Pakistan. So there is bid rigging prevalent in government construction projects, which are large value contracts, and both parties, buyer and seller, have their vested interests. In most of these large-scale procurement cases, the number of competitors is limited, which makes it easier to communicate and coordinate collusive behavior. Collusion tends to be more likely when the competitors know each other well. And trade associations that companies put together to form to help lobby with the government for market development activities can tend to facilitate collusion. And these are the findings that we have had in the last 10 years working at the CCP. Now, how do we fight bid rigging? What are some of the steps? I'm sorry, it's a little tricky to read this, but I'll start at the top. So it says effective procurement regulator and regulation. So we do have a federal public procurement regulatory authority, and then we have the provincial offshoots, which have their laws and their regulations. An effective competition law and regulations, that happens to be the Competition Commission of Pakistan. An effective leniency program which allows whistleblowers and people to share cartel information. We have that in the CCP law as well as the National Accountabilities Ordinance. Effective anti-corruption enforcement procedures and institutions, that's the NAB and the Auditor General. Effective sanctions, the CCP has power to impose sanctions. The NAB is also empowered to impose sanctions as well as the Auditor General. And then this is the enforcement side, and the last square, it's very important to advocate for what makes for, how do companies protect themselves from the egregious effects of bid rigging in public procurement? What are the signs? How do you design tenders? What are the checklists and the signs that you can use to see whether you're becoming a victim of any procurement wrongdoing? Now, let's quickly look at some of these key agencies in Pakistan. Now, the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority was established in 2002, Rehan Sahab?
It was 23rd October 2002.
Okay, so 23rd October 2002. And then that's when the PPRA ordinance came out, and then the public procurement rules were issued in 2004, and these were designed 6 June 2004 to encourage transparency in procurement. And now the PPRA ordinance and the rules are applicable to all procuring agencies of the federal government, and open competitive bidding is the principal default method of procurement. And any bid above a threshold of 100,000 rupees has to be advertised.
What?
It's not even 100,000, it's 999.
No, but you can enhance it to 500,000, for the autonomous organizations. This is a limit which can be changed, but that's correct. That in fact I would say that even over the counter to put 25,000, a semblance of competitiveness comes out, and since you're not allowed to split those procurements in small packets and spread them over time, so that even for the free quotation, which we generally call a drawer or a desk procurement, even that is kind of slightly open than any other form of procurement. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so 99,999.
Sorry, apart from the open competitive bid, we are also having the direct
You have
negotiated tendering.
Yeah, exactly. You have that.
And quotations as well. So there are different
Okay.
types of
Exactly.
procurement.
A, B, C, for
All right. So when it comes to the Competition Commission, our Section 4 of our legal framework talks about prohibited agreements, and I'm not going to read all that legalese over there. But I think when you come to subsection 2 and you look at the key points, so fixing the purchase or selling price is something that we are supposed to look at. Dividing or sharing the markets for goods and services, again, market allocation is something that violates the competition law. And specific mention in the last line there, collusive tendering or bidding. So the Competition Act also allows the Competition Commission to look at procurement issues here. When we look at the legal framework in terms of the leniency provisions, the NAB ordinance has specific mention of leniency provisions that are supposed to help encourage whistleblowing in any corrupt activity. And Section 39 of the Competition Act also has a leniency provision. So if any individual or undertaking can share information regarding a cartel or cartel-like behavior, then they can come to us. But NAB, of course, has a certain mechanism, but the leniency provision is common to both legal frameworks here. Now, what we need when you talk about improving public procurement in Pakistan, so we have the hardware, we have the institutions, the PPRAs, we have the Competition Commission, we have the National Accountability Bureau and the Auditor General of Pakistan, and we have the software, the related frameworks, and we have specific mention of collusive tendering, bidding, and how they need to be addressed. it's very important, and I think this is where development effectiveness comes in. So what we need is a very holistic approach that includes the key stakeholders. So, when you look at enforcement to protect against collusive practices in procurement, partnership between the procurement regulator, the anti-corruption agency, and the Supreme Audit Institution becomes very important. In addition to the enforcement part, I think advocating for policy change and good behavior is the other side of the coin. So you need to have both working in tandem. Now this is a screenshot of Transparency's international page, and this is from the recommendations of the Corruption's Perception Index of 2017, last year. So if you notice in that bullet point, it makes specific recommendation to governments and businesses to share or disclose relevant public information in open data formats. And I'm now trying to link everything that's gone before to what we're trying to achieve by having a series of these meetings. If you can convert procurement information into open data, and Mr. Asim Ghaffar will be sharing his expertise on open data as we go along. So this is very interesting to see that one of the steps to encourage or to reduce procurement issues is to have things converted into open data. Moving forward, now what are the sources of this data? The federal and provincial procurement regulatory authorities have probably a lot of information regarding procurement activities within their spheres or their geographical spheres. The National Accountability Bureau under Section 33B has a contract evaluation form which every procuring agency that engages in a tender of rupees 50 million and above must provide to the Bureau. And unfortunately, we don't have anybody from NAB here to share as to how this practice is being implemented or enforced. But NAB itself is a good repository of useful information that can be used. So if it's coming to addressing corruption and collusion, it's not the work of the Competition Commission alone. So the partnership between the three bodies is very, very important. And I'm happy to say that our partnership with the federal PPRA, at least, we signed an MOU for exchange of information in January 2017. We have not found ways to take this forward, but we'd like to sort of formalize the partnership in a more open and more dynamic exchange of information and access to the data that they have. We have also been in touch with our counterparts in Korea because they've developed a very good software system that helps track issues of bid rigging in public procurement. And this is a very sort of highly developed software for which the South Korean government has been globally recognized and applauded and how they've tackled corruption and procurement. Just to give an example, just the penalties in 2014 that the Korean competition agency imposed on their companies was $1.04 billion. That's just the penalties. So if you can imagine, the penalties are, let's say, 10% of the procurement value taking place. So that's a huge amount of procurement that's being tampered with in an established jurisdiction like Korea, which has access to data, etc. So you can imagine the endemic nature of how corruption and procurement go hand in hand. It's also important to have advocacy measures, educating people on the possible harm and cost of fraud and collusion, and educating public procurement officials about what they should look for to detect signs of bid rigging, the types of fraud associated with government procurement, and what is it that they can do to protect themselves from reputational damage. I do understand that the PPRA had started training of government officials in 2006 under a 3-year World Bank capacity building project. I'm not certain if any follow-up project is happening. And in 2009, the federal PPRA established a National Institute of Procurement to help formalize these training activities. But again, the status of the capacity building project and the National Institute of Procurement, I'm not very clear. Perhaps Rehan Saab might have some information on this. And while we're talking on advocacy, let me just sort of end. Now, I was looking at the Transparency International Corruptions Perceptions Index. So I just took a snapshot of the countries in the region. So Afghanistan, 172 out of 180 countries, the rank. But the up arrow indicates that they're improving. Bangladesh, 149 out of 180 countries, slightly down. When you look at India, 41, but their rank is 78 out of 180 countries. When you look at Nepal, their rank is 124 out of 180 countries, no status of whether they're improving or not improving. Sri Lanka is 89 out of 180 countries, and Pakistan is at 117 out of 180 countries in the Corruptions Perceptions Index. I believe the figure of 117 remains unchanged from last year. So what is it that we can do? What is the way forward today? What are some takeaways or options points, as Dr. Vakar was mentioning a little bit? What is something that we can do to help improve this 117 to something below 100? And I think procurement and addressing public procurement issues is that low-hanging fruit that all of us can work on to improve Pakistan's Corruptions Perception Index ranking by Transparency International. So let me just conclude by saying that making Pakistan not only competitive, but better in terms of how it gives value to its citizens, of which we are now 200 million plus. How do we improve as an economy? How do we become that destination that attracts foreign direct investment? How do we mobilize and utilize public resources for best value for money? I think it's not just the job of the government or the private sector, it's pretty much everybody's job. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ahmed Saab. I think you've set the stage and not only also explained that how CCP can help this pursuit, but how CCP is also a stakeholder in this effort as well. I think those were very sort of specific interventions that you explained, which can help Pakistan's rank in those indicators which you showed from the Transparency International is important. I think we'll be able to discuss it further during the open discussion. Maybe I can, without further ado, request Rehan Haider Saab for his intervention, please.
Thank you. First disclaimer that I do not represent World Bank here today. It's a Developer Effectiveness Forum, and it's one solid block of people together can work together. This was something, it was on Anti-Corruption Day, a year back, 2 years back, where we resolved, me and Ahmed, that we will at least try and make these small efforts of getting Pakistan under 100 in the Corruption Perception Index. And really thank Dr. Vakar for making it happen. This is effectively the launch of that resolve that we made a year and a half back. Today happens to be 13th Feb, a data day. It's an inaugural data day, which means that World Bank would be now regularly celebrating 13th Feb as the data day, where we would be talking about interoperability of data, in addition to the profusion, how all the data, all the different service, the tribalism in data could be neutralized in order to make it a coherent whole. So this is exactly the problem where we, over the coffee, we had this, small discussion we were having, and which kind of crystallized into what's happening today, is how we can, as the first step in development effectiveness, have the various accountability institutes. For example, the federal and subnational PPRAs, Auditor General of Pakistan, Competition Commission, NAB, they all have a data which can be standardized in form and format, and can be made available freely to each other and also to the larger public for an enhanced citizen engagement. And whenever you have an enhanced citizen engagement, you're able to neutralize a lot of things, a lot of inefficiencies, because you feel accountable. There was something I proposed, because we don't have friends from PPRA today. I think Asim was joining, but I think I think Asim is a big time IT guy. He's a solid IT background. Then he could be a great help in that. In PPRAs, all of the public procurement regulations, national and subnational, there is an ingrained element of open contracting. You have disclosures right from Rule 8, procurement planning. Then you have Rule 35, public disclosure of evaluations. And then you have Rule 47, which talks about, availability of records to the larger public. Because you need proactive disclosure. Like most of the time we try to sell our data availability on presence of right to information, but this is a passive disclosure. So active disclosure would be that whatever I tendered for in the newspaper, if I have evaluation or the result of evaluation being publicized at the same level, that's the kind of accountability, that's the kind of openness which is needed, which will definitely make people accountable for their actions. They will exactly know that this is the bid evaluation report, this is as a result of whatever was published on the Sunday dawn, dated this. This is the result of that evaluation. This is the person who has been awarded the contract. Once that kind of enforcement starts, now those rules are there, those placeholders are there, laws are there. It's, I think, the advocacy which is missing. It is the public awareness and the kind of power we have at hand with the social media. We could definitely make all these things happen. We can have this disclosure more proactive, and once these things start happening, starting from the budget making down to disclosure of audit reports, I do not think that we will give a lot of room or will give any room to anybody to engage in what Amit referred to as bid rigging. Bid rigging is a major thing, and cover bidding. Cover bidding is another phenomena where you have a large foreign firm who comes in, enters into a joint venture with a very small do-nothing firm, gets the contract because of its credentials, and then pull out completely. This is happening in the consulting industry. The consulting industry is the new civil work, I would say, where a lot of money is going because it's up here, it's intellectual. So it's difficult to kind of, see that what kind of bid rigging. So you conspire a very urgent need. You say that it is really needed, it has to be done. If these institutional reforms do not happen, or if these reforms in PSDP do not happen in next 2 days, all the budget would go down the drain. This is the kind of urgency which is created about various things. At back of that, you already have a firm who has been able to kind of put those words in your mouth and inspire you to initiate that, create a placeholder in the budget for that, or have that discussion with one of the IFIs to get that kind of consulting contract for something like roughly $3 to $5 million. This is a day in and day out thing that we handle. I support Pakistan and Afghanistan, so like these are the things I come across that where I personally am lost to see that what exactly is being driven home by that, what would be the outcome of that. And there's a lot of money kind of is lost. So like if you have a procurement plan which is displayed available to the public, if you have a shortlisting available to the public, if you have an evaluation available to the public, if you have results of the contract available to the public, now you will exactly know that this particular firm ABC is actually blacklisted in a certain province or by a certain financing institute. How come this firm is so? Once you have that kind of a data set available, things really change. But that's at another level, but more focused. At this point in time, we have federalism which is pretty fractured, and we have it has its dividend, it has its pluses, but I personally do not know of a central authority that could give a directive, administrative instruction, or a gazetted instruction about this is the data format which will be used. Every data will be in Excel or a PDF format or whatever. These are the mandatory fields, because these are the fields which are needed by NAB. The Form 33B fields are the ones, if they are made available to the performance audit of AGP, if these are made available to Competition Commission, I think all of them and to all the procurement regulatory authorities, I think it's a major breakthrough in creating a kind of a 360-degree circle in which you cannot miss out on any procurement which is at least 50 million plus. So these are small steps towards development effectiveness. I think this is what needs to be done. A lot of noise needs to be created, a lot of citizen advocacy, a lot of citizen support and outreach is needed in order to open up, in order to have these disclosures become more proactive. We have taken some baby steps in doing an open data assessment under our $400 million PFM project with finance department, where we have PPRAs, all PPRAs and accountant journal, all of them are part of that. So we are doing a open data assessment that what is the state of readiness we are in, and then we will start discussions on standardization of data across the country. I don't know which would be the central authority doing that. You know, I'm lost for that. But I don't have an answer. Somebody around the room have an answer that who in the government would be able to pass out those instructions which standardize the data. So at least formats or the form is agreed, and then we can start discussions around what can be shared, because everything under RTI is basically, you know, not unless it's for national security concerns, it's a data which should be available to the public. So thank you. Any questions? I'm a very non-PowerPoint person. I like discussion, I like to hear voices. Thank you.